I think I might hold the world record for the shortest time between moving into a new neighborhood and having the police called on me by the HOA president. 24 hours. The reason? Her entitled racist son decided my private swimming pool was his personal playground, and his mother, the queen of the cul-de-sac, backed his play. The colossal problem for her. I'm the police commander they called to handle the situation. So, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because I promise you, this story gets absolutely wild. My life is, by necessity, structured and demanding. As a commander in a major metropolitan police department, my days are a carefully managed chaos of budgets, personnel issues, operational strategies, and political navigation. It's a pressure cooker. My wife, Sarah, passed away a few years ago, and since then, the silence in our big family home had become a presence of its own. With my daughter away at college, the 4 bedrooms and sprawling yard felt less like a home and more like a museum of a life I used to live. So, I made a decision. I wanted peace. I wanted a place where the loudest sound was the fizz of a cold drink, and the biggest decision of my day was whether to read a book or float on the water. After months of searching, I found it. A beautiful, modern 2-bedroom house in a subdivision called Willow Creek Estates. The name alone sounded tranquil. It was an upscale, predominantly white neighborhood about 30 minutes outside the city, known for its manicured lawns and quiet streets. The house wasn't huge, but it was architecturally stunning. All clean lines, glass, and dark wood. And it had the one feature that sealed the deal: a magnificent, in-ground saltwater pool, surrounded by a high, modern privacy fence and professional landscaping. It was my own private oasis, a place to decompress and just be. I paid a premium for it, and as I signed the closing papers, I imagined floating in that pristine blue water, the stress of my job dissolving under the summer sun. The move itself was exhausting but efficient. By the end of the first day, the last box was inside, and I was sitting on my new patio furniture, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air was clean, the birds were chirping, and a sense of profound calm washed over me. This, I thought, was going to be perfect. My naivete was almost adorable in retrospect. The next morning, as I was arranging my coffee maker, the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was a woman who looked like she was sculpted from disapproval. She was probably in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could deflect small arms fire, and a pastel pink pantsuit that screamed, "I demand to speak to the manager of this entire zip code." She held a thick, binder, clipped stack of papers in one hand. "Good morning," I said, offering a friendly smile. "I'm Marcus." Her eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of me, from my casual t-shirt down to my bare feet, before landing somewhere over my shoulder, as if looking for the real owner. "I am Brenda," she announced, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth. "I am the president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association." She thrust the binder at me. "This is our welcome packet. It contains the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, our bylaws, and the fine schedule. I suggest you read it thoroughly. We maintain very high standards in this community." There was an immediate, palpable condescension in her tone. It was the kind of tone I'd heard 1,000 times, the one that implied I was an outsider who needed to be educated on how civilized people behave. "Thank you, Brenda," I said, my smile becoming a little more forced. "I'll be sure to give it a look. I'm looking forward to being a part of the community." She gave a tight little nod that conveyed she'd believe it when she saw it. The monthly dues are due on the 1st. The packet has instructions for setting up automatic payments. We find that's easier for new people. The slight pause before new people was laden with meaning. I knew exactly what she was seeing. A black man in a neighborhood where I was clearly a demographic outlier. I wasn't just a new neighbor. I was a variable she hadn't accounted for and didn't approve of. The interaction left a sour taste in my mouth, but I brushed it off. Every community has its busybodies. I wasn't going to let one sour woman ruin my hard-won peace. I had a pool to enjoy. That afternoon, the sun was brilliant. I changed into my swim trunks, grabbed a towel and a book, and headed out to my personal paradise. The water was cool and perfect. I floated on my back, eyes closed, letting the gentle lapping of the water against the sides of the pool wash away the lingering annoyance from my morning encounter with Brenda. For about 30 minutes, it was exactly what I had dreamed of. Then, I heard a rattling sound at the gate of my fence, followed by a loud, belligerent voice. "Hey, yo, open up!" I sat up, treading water, and looked toward the gate. Standing there were 3 teenagers, one of whom was yanking aggressively on the locked handle. He was a lanky kid with a sneer that seemed to be his default expression, wearing baggy shorts and a brand-name shirt that was probably more expensive than my entire outfit. "Can I help you?" I called out, swimming to the edge of the pool. The kid squinted at me. "Yeah, you can open the gate. We're here to swim." His tone wasn't a request, it was a demand. "Sorry, but this is a private pool," I said calmly. "It belongs to the house." The kid actually laughed, a short, barking sound of disbelief. "No, it's not. This is the community pool. My mom said we could use it whenever. She runs this place." A cold little knot formed in my stomach. The "my mom runs this place" line, combined with the attitude, it had to be Brenda's kid. "Your mom is Brenda?" I asked. "Yeah," he scoffed. "And she's the HOA president. So you better open up before you get in trouble." His 2 friends shuffled nervously behind him, clearly not as confident in the situation. I got out of the pool, grabbing my towel. I walked over to the fence, keeping a reasonable distance. "Listen," I said, keeping my voice level and calmly de-escalation training kicking in automatically. "Your mother was here this morning. She gave me the HOA documents. There is no community pool listed in the amenities. This pool is part of my private property. You and your friends are welcome to go to the actual community clubhouse, but you can't come in here." The kid's face twisted into a mask of ugly rage. His entitlement was so profound that the concept of being told no was like a foreign language he couldn't comprehend. And that's when the situation took a nosedive. "Don't you lie to me," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "We know they just let anyone in here now." He then dropped a racial slur, a word designed to wound and diminish. "My mom's gonna get you kicked out of here anyway. Now open the damn gate before I come in there and open it myself." My calm evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard anger, but decades of training kept my expression neutral. I looked him dead in the eye. "You have 5 seconds to get off my property before I call the police for trespassing," I said, my voice low and dangerous. The kid, whom I'd later learn was named Kevin, was too arrogant to see the shift. He took it as a challenge. He spat on the ground, then grabbed the top of the fence and started to hoist himself up. That was it. I turned, walked back inside my house, and locked the sliding glass door. I picked up my phone, but not to call 911. Instead, I opened the app for my security system. I have top-of-the-line cameras covering every inch of my property's exterior. I tapped the screen and watched in crystal-clear 4K as Kevin, now perched on top of my fence, screamed obscenities at my back door while his friends tried to coax him down. He was shouting that he was calling his mom and that I was going to be sorry. I zoomed in on his furious, distorted face, hit the record button, and settled in to see just how sorry I was going to be. Kevin's shrieking tirade from atop my fence was being meticulously documented by 3 different camera angles, complete with high-fidelity audio that captured every last slur and threat. He finally scrambled down, not into my yard, but back onto the sidewalk. After his friends seemingly convinced him that scaling a fence to confront a grown man twice his size might not be the brilliant strategic move he imagined. He stood there, red-faced and panting, stabbing at his phone with a chubby finger. I knew exactly who he was calling. The curtain was about to rise on Act 2 of this suburban tragicomedy. I remained inside, watching the live feed on my tablet. It was a surreal, out-of-body experience. Part of my brain, the professional part, was coolly analyzing the situation. I had a clear trespasser, verbal assault, and an attempted forced entry. The evidence was pristine. Another part of me, the new homeowner who just wanted a quiet swim, was seething. I had been in my sanctuary for a single day, and it had already been violated by this toxic sense of entitlement. This wasn't just a kid being a jerk. This was a worldview, inherited and weaponized, that assumed my presence in this neighborhood and my ownership of this property were illegitimate. Less than 5 minutes later, a pristine white Lexus SUV screeched to a halt at the curb. Brenda launched herself out of the driver's side, her face a thundercloud of righteous fury. She didn't even glance at my house. She went straight to her son, enveloping him in a protective hug as if he'd just survived a harrowing ordeal. Kevin, playing the part of the victim to the hilt, gestured wildly at my house, his voice a high-pitched whine of grievance. I couldn't hear their exact words, but the body language was a universal language of, "He was mean to me." After getting her son's completely unbiased and factual report, Brenda straightened her pink pantsuit, took a deep breath as if preparing for battle, and marched up my driveway. She didn't go to the front door. She marched straight to the gate of my pool fence and began rattling it violently, just as her son had done. "Open this gate immediately," she screeched, her voice sharp enough to etch glass. "I know you're in there, hiding." I decided it was time for a face-to-face. I put my tablet down, walked to the sliding glass door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the patio. I folded my arms and looked at her, my expression unreadable. "Brenda," I said, my voice calm, "we need to have a serious conversation about your son." Her eyes blazed. "I'll be the one having a serious conversation, thank you very much. It will be with the police. How dare you threaten a child?" A child who was simply trying to use a community amenity that his dues pay for. The sheer audacity of her statement was breathtaking. She was doubling down on a lie that was demonstrably, laughably false. "Brenda, I'm going to say this one more time, as clearly as I possibly can," I said, enunciating every word. "This is not a community pool. It is my private pool on my private property. Your own HOA documents, which you gave me this morning, will confirm that. Your son attempted to illegally enter my property after I told him he was not welcome. He used racist language and threatened me. It is all recorded on my security system." The mention of security cameras gave her a flicker of pause, a momentary tightening around her eyes, but her arrogance quickly overrode any glimmer of self-preservation. "Recorded? Don't you threaten me with your little spy cameras. That's probably against the bylaws too. You are the one who is trespassing. This entire backyard area is designated HOA common space and you have illegally commandeered it." She was just making things up now, inventing rules and designations on the fly to support her narrative. It was both pathetic and infuriating. "I am calling the authorities," she declared, puffing out her chest, "and I am going to have you removed. We'll see who has the right to be here." She whipped out her phone with a flourish. I simply watched her. My mind was racing. I could have ended it right there. I could have pulled out my own phone, made one call to the on-duty watch commander, and this entire circus would have folded in on itself. But something held me back. I wanted to see it through. I wanted to see how the system I was a part of would respond to a call like this, from her side, without my influence. I wanted her to build her own gallows, plank by plank. "Yes, 911, she said into the phone, her voice suddenly trembling with manufactured fear. "I need police at 124 Willow Creek Lane immediately. There is a man, a very large, aggressive man, who has illegally occupied our community pool area. He's a squatter. He threatened my son, my teenage son. He's hostile. Please, you need to send someone right away before he gets violent." She laid it on so thick, it was a caricature of a damsel in distress call. She cast a triumphant, venomous look at me as she ended the call. "They're on their way. You're going to jail." I just nodded slowly. "Okay, Brenda." I turned and went back inside, locking the door behind me. She seemed to take this as an act of cowardice, of me retreating in fear. She let out a short, satisfied, and went back to the street to wait with her son, the conquering hero. Inside, I was a strange mix of fury and morbid curiosity. I sat in a chair that had a clear view of the street. I thought about the two young officers who would likely respond. I pictured them getting the call, report of a hostile squatter, aggressive male, possibly violent. They would roll up expecting a certain scenario, their training preparing them for the worst. And they would find me, a 6'2" black man, and a hysterical white woman pointing a finger and screaming. I knew how this could go. I'd seen it go wrong 1,000 times. But I was also their commander. The wait was only about 6 minutes. A black and white patrol car turned onto my quiet street, its arrival seeming to suck all the other sound from the air. Brenda immediately went into performance mode, flagging it down, waving her arms frantically. The car pulled up, and 2 officers got out. They were young, one male, one female. I recognized them both, Officer Miller and Officer Chen. Good kids, both sharp, both professional. They listened patiently to Brenda's frantic finger-pointing narrative, their expressions remaining neutral but cautious. They occasionally glanced toward my house. I saw Miller put his hand on the grip of his service weapon, not drawing it, but just resting it there, a subconscious act of readiness ingrained by thousands of similar calls. After a minute, they started walking up my driveway. Miller was in the lead. They moved with purpose, their eyes scanning. I decided to meet them at the door. I opened it before they could knock, stepping out onto the porch with my hands visible and empty. "Good afternoon, officers," I said, Miller's eyes fixed on me. He was trying to place me, but in this contextual suburban house, casual clothes, the subject of a squatter call it wasn't clicking. "Sir," he began, his voice the formal, authoritative tone they teach at the academy. "We've had a report of a disturbance. Can you tell me your name and what you're doing here?" From the street, Brenda yelled, "That's him. He's the one. He's trespassing. Get him out of here." The officers ignored her, their focus entirely on me. This was the moment, the grand reveal. I reached into the back pocket of my shorts, moving slowly and deliberately. "My name is Marcus Thorne," I said, pulling out my wallet. I didn't say my last name was on the deed to the house. I flipped open my wallet and held up my badge and ID card. "Commander Marcus Thorne. It's good to see you, Miller Chen." The change that came over their faces was instantaneous and profound. It was a rapid-fire sequence of confusion, to disbelief, to dawning comprehension, and finally, to sheer, unadulterated horror. Officer Miller's eyes widened, and he physically took a step back, his hand flying off his weapon as if it had been burned. Officer Chen's jaw literally dropped open for a second before she snapped it shut. "Commander?" Miller stammered, his face paling. "Sir, we had no idea." He looked back at Brenda, who was still fuming on the sidewalk, and then back at me, a look of complete bewilderment on his face. The power dynamic on my front lawn had just shifted so completely and so seismically that the ground itself seemed to tremble. Brenda had called the cavalry, fully expecting them to charge in and vanquish her enemy. She had no idea she'd just summoned them to bear witness to her own spectacular self-destruction. The silence that descended upon my front yard was thick with unspoken panic, at least from the 2 officers standing before me. Officer Miller looked as if he'd just accidentally run over the mayor's dog. Officer Chen was frantically trying to compose her features into something resembling professional calm, but her wide eyes betrayed her. "Commander," Miller said again, his voice now a mixture of deference and dread. "Sir, I am so sorry for the intrusion. The call came in as a hostile squatter situation." "I know exactly how the call came in, Miller," I said, my voice even but firm. I tucked my ID back in my pocket. "You and Officer Chen did nothing wrong. You responded professionally to a call for service. That's your job." I let that sink in for a moment, giving them a chance to reboot their brains. Then, I gestured with my head toward the street. "The problem isn't with your response, the problem is with the person who made the fraudulent call." At that moment, Brenda, apparently tired of being ignored, started striding up the driveway again. "What is taking so long?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "Why haven't you arrested him yet? He's dangerous." She stopped dead when she saw the body language of the officers. They were standing almost at attention, their entire posture deferential toward me. Her face, a canvas of smug certainty just moments before, now registered confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes darting between me and the officers. I looked at Miller. "Officer, I believe this woman, Miss Brenda." I paused, looking at her. "I'm sorry, I don't know your last name. Has just filed a false police report. A serious offense. I'd like you to take her official statement." "On your body camera, please." Miller, now back on the solid ground of procedure, nodded eagerly. "Yes, sir." "Right away, sir." He turned to Brenda, his demeanor transformed. The cautious respect he'd shown her earlier was gone, replaced by a stern, official coolness. "Ma'am, I need you to stay right there. I'm going to be asking you some questions about the call you placed to 911. Brenda's jaw worked silently for a moment. Her brain was trying to process the shift in the universe, and it was failing spectacularly. What? What did you call him? She whispered, pointing a trembling finger at me. He's the trespasser. Chen stepped forward slightly. Ma'am, this is Commander Thorne, of the MPD, and this is his home. The words hit Brenda like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, her face draining of all color. The pink of her pantsuit suddenly looked garish against her ashen skin. Commander? She squeaked, the word barely audible. Number, that's not possible. It's very possible, I said flatly. Now, as I was saying, Officer Miller is going to take your statement. And while he does that, Officer Chen, I'd like you to take my statement. I want to press charges against her son, Kevin, for trespassing and attempted breaking and entering. I have high-definition video of the entire incident, including his efforts to scale my fence after being warned to leave. I then looked directly at Estelle, shocked Brenda. And I will be pursuing charges against you, Brenda, for filing a false police report and harassment. This was the final nail in the coffin of her composure. Her panicked denial morphed into a desperate attempt at backpedaling. No, wait, this is all a misunderstanding. A simple misunderstanding. I had no idea. I was just looking out for the community. She stammered, wringing her hands. It's a mistake. Kevin is a good boy. He just got confused. We can forget this whole thing ever happened, right? A neighborly misunderstanding. I gave her a look of pure ice. The time for misunderstandings was before you called 911 and accused me of being a violent squatter. The time for misunderstandings was before your son used racial slurs against me on my own property. We are long past that point, ma'am. We're in the realm of consequences now. The two officers, following my lead, went to work. Miller began formally questioning a sputtering, incoherent Brenda, his body cameras blinking red light, a silent witness to her lies unraveling. Chen, meanwhile, took my statement with meticulous care, noting the times, the sequence of events, and the existence of the video evidence. Kevin, who had been watching from the curb, was now being spoken to by another officer from a second patrol car that had arrived as backup. The boy's earlier bravado had completely vanished, replaced by the pale, slack-jawed fear of a teenager who finally understands he is in serious, adult trouble. After about 20 minutes of this painful sidewalk theater, the officers concluded their preliminary work. Brenda and Kevin were officially informed that charges were being filed and that they would be contacted by the city prosecutor's office. They were sent home, a dejected and broken pair, their walk of shame back to their house, a stark contrast to Brenda's triumphant march just an hour earlier. The immediate threat was gone, but I knew the war was far from over. Brenda wasn't just a nuisance neighbor, she was the HOA president. She held institutional power. The false police report was a symptom. The disease was her unchecked authority and the culture of fear she'd cultivated in the community. Beating her in this one skirmish wasn't enough. I needed to dismantle her entire power structure, for my own peace and for the sake of every other homeowner she'd bullied. That evening, with the sun setting on the most eventful first day in a new home imaginable, I sat at my new dining room table. Instead of unpacking books or arranging furniture, I had Brenda's welcome packet, the thick binder of HOA rules, spread out before me. I poured a glass of bourbon, pulled out a highlighter and a legal pad, and began to read. I read every single line of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I cross-referenced the bylaws with the articles of incorporation. I dissected the budget sheet included. My police work had taught me that criminals and tyrants, big and small, always leave a paper trail. They get arrogant, they get sloppy, and I was willing to bet my new mortgage that Brenda was no exception. The next day, a Sunday, I decided to do some in-person reconnaissance. I saw my next-door neighbors, an older couple, out gardening. I walked over and introduced myself. Hi, I'm Marcus, your new neighbor. The man, who introduced himself as David, gave me a warm, genuine smile. His wife, Susan, was equally pleasant. We are so glad to have someone new in that house, Susan said. The last fellow was so quiet, we barely saw him. Well, I'm afraid my first 24 hours have been anything but quiet, I said with a wry smile. I gave them the condensed version of the events with Brenda and Kevin. David and Susan exchanged a look that spoke volumes, a shared glance of weary resignation. "Oh, that sounds exactly like Brenda." David sighed, shaking his head. "We call her the Queen of Willow Creek. She runs this place like her own personal kingdom." That was all the opening I needed. For the next hour, they painted a vivid picture of Brenda's reign. They told me about exorbitant fines for grass that was a quarter-inch too long, about her rejecting architectural requests for new paint colors based on her personal taste, and about her using the HOA's landscaping budget to have special projects done that suspiciously seemed to be centered around her own property. David, a retired forensic accountant, mentioned something that made my ears perk up. "I've always been suspicious of the financials," he said, lowering his voice. "She presents a very simple, top-level budget at the annual meeting, but she refuses to provide detailed line-item expenses. Says it's too complicated for most people to understand. It's insulting, and it's a huge red flag." A forensic accountant. The universe had just handed me my secret weapon. "David," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, "I think you and I need to talk. I have a feeling that if we combine my investigative skills with your financial expertise, we might just be able to bring a little democracy back to Willow Creek Estates." David's eyes lit up with a spark I suspected hadn't been there in years. "Son," he said, "you have no idea how long I've been waiting for someone to say that." The alliance was forged. The counteroffensive had begun. My conversation with David was like finding a key to a lock I didn't even know I was trying to pick. He was a treasure trove of institutional knowledge, a quiet observer who had meticulously noted years of Brenda's overreaches and abuses, but had lacked the leverage or the allies to mount a credible challenge. Now, he had both. We met in my kitchen the next morning over coffee, the infamous HOA binder spread between us like a battlefield map. My methodical, evidence-based police training and his razor-sharp accountant's mind created an immediate synergy. We were a two-man insurgency planning a coup. Our first official act was to draft a formal, legally sound request for records. Citing the specific sections of the HOA bylaws that guaranteed homeowners access to financial documents, we requested the detailed, line-item budget for the past 3 years, all bank statements, and copies of all contracts and invoices for vendors paid more than $500. We wrote it in dry, precise language, sent it via certified mail to Brenda's address, and CC'd the entire HOA board. We wanted this to be official, on the record, and impossible to ignore. Predictably, Brenda stonewalled. A week later, we received a curt, dismissive letter. She claimed our request was overly broad and burdensome, and that the simplified budget provided in the welcome packet was sufficient for our needs. She included another copy of the same useless, one-page summary she gave everyone. But in her arrogance, she made a critical error. She didn't outright deny the request, she delayed it, which, under the bylaws, she couldn't legally do without a board vote. This small procedural mistake was our first piece of ammunition against her governance. While David was focused on the financial paper trail, I decided to explore another avenue. My job had given me a deep understanding of municipal bureaucracy and, more importantly, a long list of contacts in various city departments. I didn't want to flash my badge to get special treatment, but I knew exactly which public records to request and how to request them. I took a trip downtown to the city's Planning and Zoning Department. I filed a public records request for all permits, plans, and inspection reports associated with Brenda's address for the last 10 years. It was a long shot, but my gut told me that someone who so flagrantly disregards the rules of her own HOA was unlikely to be a stickler for city building codes. While waiting for those records, I focused on building a coalition. David, Susan, and I began discreetly talking to other neighbors. We didn't lead with our plan to overthrow Brenda. We started by listening. We'd catch people while they were getting their mail or walking their dogs, and simply ask, "We're new here, and we had a bit of an odd run-in with the HOA president. Have you had any issues?" It was like opening a floodgate. We heard story after story of petty tyranny. A young couple fined $200 because their toddler's plastic slide was visible from the street for a few hours. A widower who was denied permission to plant a memorial tree for his late wife because Brenda didn't like the species. An engineer who had a lien put on his house over a dispute about the color of his window trim. For years, these residents had felt isolated and powerless. Now, for the first time, they realized they weren't alone. The groundswell of discontent was real and growing. About 2 weeks into our investigation, I got a call from the city clerk. My records request was ready. I drove down and picked up the file. Sitting in my car in the City Hall parking lot, I started flipping through the documents, and there it was. Or rather, there it wasn't. There were permits for the original construction of the house and a small fence permit from 9 years ago. But the massive, 200-square-foot she shed in her backyard, complete with electrical and plumbing, wasn't there. The sprawling, multi-level flagstone patio with a built-in fire pit and outdoor kitchen, not a single permit had been pulled. No plans submitted, no inspections done. She had built a significant addition to her property, completely off the books. It was a major code violation, one that carried hefty fines and a legal order to either bring it up to code or tear it down. For an HOA president who fined people for the color of their mailboxes, this level of hypocrisy was staggering. This was a powerful weapon. But the real smoking gun came from David. Frustrated by Brenda's stonewalling, he'd used a bit of his old forensic accounting magic. He noticed on the one-page budget a single large line item called Community Landscaping and Beautification minus $28. It seemed high for a neighborhood that mostly relied on individual homeowners to maintain their own property. On a hunch, he did a public record search on the business registry. He searched for landscaping companies in our county, but he didn't find anything that matched the vendors Brenda had casually mentioned in past meetings. Then, he had a brilliant idea. He started searching for any corporation registered to Brenda's name or address. Nothing. Then he searched her maiden name, which Susan had remembered from years ago. Bingo! A company called Evergreen Designs LLC was registered not to a commercial address, but to Brenda's own home address. The sole officer and registered agent was listed as Brenda under her maiden name. It was a shell company. David was practically vibrating with excitement when he called me. "I found it, Marcus. I found it. She's been paying herself. For 10 years, she's been submitting invoices from her own phantom company and cutting checks from the HOA account to pay for her own private landscaping, her fancy patio, her flowers. It's not just a violation of the bylaws. It's straight-up embezzlement. Wire fraud, mail fraud, it's a felony." We now had an arsenal. We had the initial incident, the false police report, the trespassing, the racial slurs, all documented. We had proof of her violating city codes on a massive scale. We had dozens of testimonials from terrorized neighbors. And now, we had the kill shot. Undeniable evidence that she had been systematically embezzling HOA funds for a decade to finance her own lavish lifestyle, hiding it behind a shell company in her maiden name. Our strategy shifted. This was no longer just about removing her from the HOA board. This was about ensuring she faced real, legal consequences for her actions. The annual HOA meeting was in 3 weeks. It was traditionally a sleepy, poorly attended affair where Brenda would pontificate for an hour before everyone rubber-stamped her budget and re-elected her and her cronies. This year, we decided, would be different. It would be a reckoning. We spent the next 2 weeks preparing. We compiled our evidence into a clear, concise presentation. We created handouts. David prepared a simplified but devastating financial analysis that anyone could understand. I organized the neighbor testimonials into a coherent narrative of abuse. We encouraged every single person we had spoken to attend the meeting. We told them that if they wanted change, they had to be in that room. The stage was set. Brenda was about to walk into her own carefully prepared ambush, utterly oblivious to the storm that was about to break over her perfectly coiffed head. The night of the annual HOA meeting felt charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. The meeting was held in the small, sterile community center clubhouse, a place that had long been Brenda's seat of power. Usually, these meetings drew maybe 15 people, mostly her board cronies and a few disgruntled residents who would complain to no effect. Tonight was different. Thanks to our quiet campaign of encouragement, nearly every household was represented. Over 100 people were packed into a room designed for 50. They filled every chair, lined the walls, and spilled out into the hallway. The sheer volume of people was a statement in itself. Brenda and her board sat at a long table at the front of the room. When she saw the crowd, a flicker of surprise crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by a smug smile. She clearly interpreted the massive turnout as a testament to her own popularity and the community's engagement under her stellar leadership. She was flanked by her husband, Gary, looking as meek and uncomfortable as ever in the front row, and her board of enablers, 12 men and 1 woman who looked like they'd been handpicked for their inability to form an independent thought. She began the meeting with her usual condescending flair, banging a small gavel for order. "Welcome, everyone. It is so wonderful to see such a fantastic turnout tonight," she chirped, beaming at the crowd. "It shows how much you all care about maintaining the exceptional standards of Willow Creek Estates." She droned on for 20 minutes, recapping her accomplishments. For the year, a new coat of paint on the clubhouse sign, a successful 4th of July picnic that she organized, and a crackdown on unauthorized basketball hoops. The crowd listened in a tense, simmering silence. Then she got to the budget. She projected the same single-page, maddeningly vague summary onto the screen behind her. "As you can see," she said, pointing a laser at the Community Landscaping and Beautification minus $28,000 line item, "we continue to invest heavily in keeping our common areas beautiful. Now, I'll entertain a motion to approve the budget as presented." This was our moment. Before one of her sycophants could speak, I stood up from my seat in the middle of the room. "Madam President," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the packed space. "Before we vote, I have a few questions about the budget. Under Article 4, Section 2 of the bylaws, I'd like to address the community." Every head in the room swiveled towards me. Brenda's smile froze on her face. Her eyes narrowed. "This isn't the forum for individual grievances, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. She still hadn't learned my name properly. "We have a full agenda." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. From the back, someone yelled, "Let him speak." Another voice joined in, "We have questions too." Brenda's face flushed with anger. She was losing control of the room, and she knew it. The board members looked at each other nervously. She gripped her gavel, but seeing the united front against her, she relented with poor grace. "Fine," she snapped. "Be brief." "I will be," I promised. I walked to the front of the room, carrying my laptop. David stood up and joined me. "Folks," I began, addressing the crowd, "my name is Marcus Thorne. I've only lived here for a month, but my experiences have led me to do some research. And what I've found is something every single one of you needs to see." I connected my laptop to the projector, and Brenda's useless budget summary was replaced by a high-resolution satellite image of my property, with the property lines clearly marked in red. Let's start with the event that triggered this investigation. My neighbor, Miss Brenda, recently called the police and falsely accused me of being a violent squatter because I would not allow her son to use my private pool. Gasps erupted around the room. I let the statement hang in the air. She claimed this was a community amenity. As you can see from the official county plot map, this pool is, and always has been, entirely on my private property. I clicked to the next slide. It was the case number from the police report I filed against her for making a false report, and the trespassing charge against her son. "This is a matter of public record," I said calmly. Brenda was on her feet now. "This is a personal attack. This is slander. This has nothing to do with the HOA." "On the contrary, Brenda, it has everything to do with the HOA," I said, turning to face her directly. "It's about an abuse of power by a president who believes she is above the law and can invent rules to suit her whims. And it seems that belief extends to how she handles our money." I nodded to David. He stepped forward. "Good evening, everyone," David said, his voice the calm, steady tone of an expert. "I am a retired forensic accountant. For years, I've been concerned about the lack of transparency in our financials. Now I know why." He projected a new slide, a detailed spreadsheet. "Brenda refused our formal request for a detailed budget, which is a violation of the bylaws. But using public records, I was able to find something interesting. this $28,000 line item for beautification? It seems a vast majority of that money, for the last 10 years, has been paid to one single vendor, a company called Evergreen Designs, LLC. He paused, letting the name sink in. Brenda's face had gone from red to a terrifying, waxy white. David clicked to the next slide. It was a screenshot of the state's corporate registry filing for Evergreen Designs. The name of the agent was there in black and white. The address was there. And who is the owner of Evergreen Designs, LLC? David asked rhetorically. Well, it's registered to our HOA president at her home address, under her maiden name. The room exploded. It wasn't just gasps now. It was shouts of thief and embezzler. People were on their feet, pointing at Brenda, their faces masks of fury. They finally understood where their money had been going: to her unpermitted patio, to her prize-winning rose bushes, to her personal landscaper. Brenda stood there, paralyzed, as the wave of anger washed over her. Her husband, Gary, looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. And speaking of that patio, I said, taking the floor for the final blow, I clicked to my last slide. It was the file from the city's zoning department, showing her address with a huge red "No Permits on File" stamp over an aerial photo of her backyard additions. It also appears our president, who fines residents for having the wrong color welcome mat, has built an entire wing onto her house illegally, without city permits or inspections. It seems the rules, financial and legal, only apply to the little people. That was it. The dam broke. One of the board members, a man who had sat silently by Brenda's side for years, stood up and banged his fist on the table. I will not be a party to this. I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in President Brenda. The motion was immediately seconded by half the room. It was chaos. Brenda was screaming now, calling us all liars, threatening lawsuits, but her voice was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The vote was called. It was unanimous. She was removed from her position, effective immediately. Her entire board resigned on the spot in disgrace. In a daze, Brenda let Gary pull her from the room, a torrent of abuse flowing from her lips as they retreated. The room fell silent for a moment, the collective shock hanging in the air. Then, someone started to clap. Soon, the entire room was applauding, a cathartic release of years of frustration. In the aftermath, a new interim board was elected, with a reluctant but determined David as the new treasurer. They offered me the presidency, but I politely declined. I told you, I said with a smile, I just want to swim in my pool. The following weeks were a whirlwind. A full professional forensic audit was conducted. It revealed Brenda had embezzled over $150,000 from the HOA over a decade. The findings were turned over to the district attorney's office. Brenda and Gary sold their house at a loss and moved away before the indictment came down. Kevin pleaded guilty to misdemeanor trespassing and was sentenced to community service and a hefty fine. The city slapped Brenda with massive penalties for the unpermitted construction. Slowly, a new culture began to take root in Willow Creek Estates. The new board operated with total transparency. The ridiculous fines were abolished. Neighbors started talking to each other again, not in hushed, fearful tones, but as friends. My pool, the catalyst for this whole suburban revolution, became the oasis I had always wanted it to be. Sometimes, David and Susan would come over, and we'd sit by the water, drinking iced tea, and marveling at the strange series of events. I moved to the suburbs seeking peace and quiet, and in the most ironic twist imaginable, I had to go to war to find it. But in the end, by standing up to one bully, we had liberated an entire community. And that, I realized, as I floated on the calm, clear water, was a kind of peace all its own. Thanks for sticking with me through this crazy story. Remember to be good to each other out there.